Hi, everyone from English 102 online class. Today, I'm going to do a 10 to 15 minute video presentation on finding middle ground and what happens when you cannot find middle ground in an argument. So, what I'm going to do right now is we're going to listen to a radio segment on NPR. Essentially about a woman who lost her best friend, one of her longtime friends, to an argument about politics, where they had opposing points of view, and she couldn't find a middle ground to save the friendship. Okay, so we're going to take a listen to this 8-minute segment, and then we're going to talk about it. All right.
She just invited me into her home. I was welcome every Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Hold on.
Called her to talk about it. She told me how she and her friend met in college 26 years ago. Sullivan was from Brooklyn and estranged from her mother. Her friend grew up in Connecticut in a campaign 4 years ago, when it seemed that supporters of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton disagreed about just about everything. It probably won't shock you to hear that, according to a new poll from the Pew Research Center, those divisions have only gotten wider, especially when it comes to hot-button issues around how race and gender affect people's lives. Other surveys show that President Trump is the most polarizing president in memory. So with that kind of division, why wouldn't it affect people's friendships? Which is why an essay by writer and marketing executive Felicia Sullivan caught our attention. It was published in Medium last week with the title, "I Lost My Best Friend of 2 Decades to Trump." When we called her to talk about it, she told me how she and her friend met in college 26 years ago. Sullivan was from Brooklyn and estranged from her mother. Her friend grew up in Connecticut in a family that, to Sullivan, seemed perfect.
She enveloped me in her family. Like, I didn't necessarily have a stable family, and she just invited me into her home. I was welcome every Thanksgiving and Christmas. You know, we vacationed together. We went to Mexico together. We went to weddings together. I was part of her children's lives. I loved her children. So this wasn't something that was, we met, we had drinks in college, and that was it. It really evolved as we became adult women. And we really were part of those most intimate parts of one another's lives.
So, which has to have made the break all the more painful.
Yeah.
And I also do want to mention something else that you talk about in your essay. You talk about the fact that at some point you developed some difficulties. Well, I'll just say some severe personal difficulties.
Yeah.
And you write about how other friends of yours were worried about you. Mm-hmm. And she was really the only one who could get through to you. And so they called her to say, "You got to help us here." That is a really deep connection. What was it that started to change? I mean, was there a sign before that you all were not on the same page when it came to certain things?
I think a little. I mean, for as long as we both could remember, I was a staunch Democrat and she's a staunch Republican. And those differences didn't necessarily divide us. But I think some of the inkling happened when Barack Obama became president and she was just really displeased. And, some words had come out during the course of holiday dinners. And then we had a discussion where we decided not to talk about politics. Our discussions that were once really respectful became sort of heated. And she sort of revealed in a conversation that just seismically changed everything, that not only was she a Trump supporter, she had really sort of opposing views on Black Lives Matter, like all the things that were really important to me, not only as a person, but as someone who's also mixed race. I just felt that I could no longer just be polite and complicit and just sort of endure the fact that we had differences. I really had to speak up because I think this is a moment when we have to do those things.
Let me read something from the essay.
Sure.
You wrote, "We had a tacit agreement, no politics. You were a lawyer who would battle to the grave, and I always had to have the last word. We would yell across our caskets if we could. We sat on either side of the political divide, but I believed we could weather our differences." And then 2016. It started with your opinions on Black Lives Matter and me shouting into the phone, and ended with your staunch support of Trump. Our once respectful yet heated discussions veered toward the ugly and profane. I'd lost all respect for you, and you in turn lost respect for me.
Oh.
I'm trying to figure out, what is it about the Trump presidency or Donald Trump as a public figure, as a political leader, that occasioned this, that really broke the truce. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
That broke the truce.
I think, obviously before the election, there were some very clear moments when you knew a lot of what he was thinking was inherently racist and misogynist. And, even though I disagree with her on John McCain was a fundamentally decent man. He was a war hero. He was someone that loved America and loved its people. And I could deeply respect that. And I could deeply respect her vote. But this is a man who is an opportunist and who doesn't necessarily have the benefit of all American people. And I think at the core, you want to look at someone and say, okay, they're inherently a decent person, even though the politics are different. I can rely that they'll actually do the right thing. And coming into that election, I didn't feel that he would do the right thing for all American people. And she did.
And here's where I have to ask, do you think your friends are racist?
Yes. She would counter and say no, but
why do you think she's a racist? Because this is one of the things that Trump supporters complain about all the time and that Trump critics also say in response. Progressives, liberals, Democrats, whatever, think that all Trump supporters are racist. And what Trump critics counter is that it's not that I think all Trump supporters are racists, but that his racism doesn't bother you.
Exactly. I think there's a difference. I think when people think about racism, unfortunately, they think of the very extreme, right? They think of the KKK. They think of all the things that have directly hurt African Americans and marginalized people in this country. And I think the more insidious ways in which we welcome racism so eagerly into our communities by saying, for example, I want to send my kids to the good schools. We want to live in good neighborhoods, which is coded language, right?
There's also another side to this as well, as you, I'm sure, know. Conservatives, including President Trump, have been criticizing what they are calling a cancel culture, which is they see as a willingness to, cancel people, everything from unfriending them to calling for them to be fired because others find their political beliefs to be offensive. And in fact, there were a couple of essays we found with people saying that conservatives who say that they've lost friends over President Trump, like one of the speakers at the RNC convention, Herschel Walker, said the same thing. They tend to see this as irrational. They consider it an irrational hatred of Donald Trump. And I just would ask, what do you say to that?
Well, first off, I think there is some truth to what they're saying about cancel culture. I would definitely agree that I think in some instances it definitely has gotten out of hand. But I think what's going on in this country with regard to how COVID was handled, to how immigrants are being treated, to how Black people are being treated, I think those are things that warrant more aggressive attention. And I don't think we can just be polite and genteel anymore. I think there has to be a time where we have to stand up and say, I'm willing to sacrifice friendships and loved ones in order to make sure that people who don't necessarily have the privileges that I do, get to live a life of dignity.
Well, before I let you go, obviously, it's a painful essay. I mean, it must have been hard to write.
It was.
And you say in the piece, you should know this one thing. I wish I could still love you. I wish I could throw open the doors and let the mothballs flutter out, but I can't.
That's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Have you heard from your friend? Do you have any sense of whether she's read your essay? And
I haven't. She's not a big online reader. I don't know. Part of me is hopeful that in years to come, maybe we'll reconcile, because this wasn't something that I decided on a whim. Obviously, this person's been in my life and she's a family, and this decision was a painful one. And I'm hoping at one point we could reconcile, right? But at this point, it's a struggle for me to kind of meet her halfway, because for her there is no going to halfway. There is only what I believe and not what I'm willing to sacrifice for the greater good. And I think that's where our difference lies. I think a lot of what I'm trying to do as a person who lives in this society is think of the larger whole and make those sacrifices. And I think, she has a very clear picture of how she wants America to look and operate, and she's willing to do everything to sort of hold up that ideal.
Well, I hope you hear from her, and if you do, I hope you'll let us know how it goes.
Absolutely.
Felicia Sullivan is the author of 2 books, and most recently an essay published in Medium called I Lost My Best Friend of 2 Decades to Trump. We reached her in Ojai, California. Felicia Sullivan, thanks so much for talking to us about your essay.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now...
Okay, now that we've listened to that segment, think about the first thing that you wrote about for this essay, the discussion questions, and even some of the things that you can think about for your first essay. Think about a time when you did have an argument, and what was it about, and how did you handle that argument, and who did you think you won the argument? And based on those questions that we covered during our first assignment, and the first few discussion questions, what do you think happened here with this woman and her friend? Do you think that she won her argument, or do you think they came at too great a cost for to lose a friend over an issue that's really important? That was really important to this woman, like being on the right side of the argument. What does that mean, and like how at what point do you decide to cancel a friend or cancel somebody's friendship, to make sure that your argument is heard and validated. So with those questions in mind, let's go over some of the things in Chapter 8 and Presentation 8 for the Unit 2, considering the Toomlin model. The Toomlin model is essentially was designed by Toomlin as a way of trying to mitigate the type of opposing points of view, the tension that arises from opposing points of view, by finding a middle ground argument. Do you think it was possible for this woman and her friend to find a middle ground? What do you think? When you construct an argument to fit your purpose, once you've decided what you want to accomplish with a Toomlin-based argument, make sure, as discussed in Chapter 2, that you deliver your argument at a time when the audience is invested in the issue at hand. So in this case, it was during a family discussion over a dinner, a Thanksgiving dinner, something that's coming up for most Americans, a time of thinking about appreciation of our country, and thinking about family members, and a lot of times family members might have expressed points of view that are fundamentally different from your own. And how do you handle that? That's one thing you have to think about. One thing is to just center your argument in what is practical and possible. Know your audience values. Let your audience know what it has to gain from your argument. Earn credibility early in the argument by establishing the knowledge of the issue and by defining your relationship to the audience. All right. The terms of Toomlin-based argument are: the contemporary British philosopher Stephen Toomlin has shaped the way we think about argument today. The classical argument is centered in a three-part structure called a syllogism: major and minor premise and conclusion. Toomlin renames these terms and adds three additional terms to the model, and moves argument from an exercise in logic to a practical scheme toward audience acceptance. Toomlin's 6 terms can be used as a checklist for writing effective arguments when your purpose is to persuade an audience of the rightness of your position. The Toomlin model is as follows. These terms are defined in the following section: are a claim, support, warrant, backing, rebuttal, qualifier. When you build an argument based on the Toomlin model, it is helpful to think of each term as a question you must answer. For example, you might want to rephrase your question as in the following terms: what is my point? What am I trying to prove? For the term support, how will I prove my point? For the term warrant, will my audience believe me on values we share, how I can justify my claim? For the term backing, be prepared to answer the question: what additional support for my warrant will I need to persuade my audience? For the term rebuttal, it requires: what points of view are different from mine should I bring to an argument? So do you think this woman in this segment should have acknowledged the opposing point of view? And I think she does. And if you listen closely, she does say that cancel culture has gone a little far on both sides, but there's some things you cannot reconcile, especially when you have so much at stake in the argument, when somebody opposes your point of view. For the term qualifier, you must ask, how can I modify the language in the argument, especially to my claims and reasons, to make an argument more reasonable? The other thing you had to think about was this woman in this radio segment being unreasonable, or do you think she was justified in making a break with her friend who expressed political views, conservative political views, and even perhaps racist views that she found offensive? We must add a seventh and vital term to the Tumlin model, and term is reasons. She did give reasons for her decision to discontinue her friendship with this other person and her other former friend. A reason falls between a claim and the specific support you bring to an argument. The reason supports a claim, and in turn a claim requires support to make it believable. Claims and reasons. A claim organizes your argument. It is a single statement to which everything in an argument connects. The focus in your argument and what you want to achieve and the point you want to make. Reasons are direct support for your claim. Reasons often function as the topic sentences. They many times begin a paragraph and announce a paragraph's main idea or focus. As the way to begin working with reasons in an argument, think about the following immediately with the word because. Backing and rebuttal. Backing supports a warrant. Bring in backing when you sense an audience will need additional convincing of your warrant. So I think the reason why this woman in this segment was essentially canceled her friendship with this other woman was because I don't think she felt like it was possible to convince her friend to think otherwise. And when that occurs, I think you do have to make a decision to make a separation between another person and yourself, even if it means ending a friendship. However, I think sometimes it's possible to do other things. Like there's an opposing scenario where you can just sort of accept the difference and try to work around it. I have a friend who also holds different political views and that are more conservative than my own, but I have not expressed. Although I've expressed disagreement with her on many occasions, I don't think I would say that I ended the friendship because of it, because I found that our friendship was more important. So rebuttal argues against the claim. It represents a different or opposing point of view on your issue. Rebuttal means essentially to state the opposite point of view, or to acknowledge, rather, the opposite point of view, and then to find some way to refute that through finding reasons to anticipate objections to an argument for several reasons. Okay? Your rebuttal needs to be countered with an eye toward why an audience may consider the position different from yours. Qualifiers, the great strength of the Tumlin system is its focus on audience. It's a little bit more accommodating towards its audience. A claim is your position on an issue, a claim that must be delivered to an audience open to hearing it. The support that you bring to an argument will be of three kinds: logical, ethical, and emotional. Each kind should appeal to your audience in a practical way. A warrant ties you to your audience based on shared or similar values, beliefs, and feelings. Backing allows you to elaborate on your warrant in order to appeal more specifically to your audience's value system. A rebuttal in an argument lets you anticipate audience objections to your claim, objections then you can counter. Qualifiers prevent you from making absolute statements because they involve words such as often, typically, in most cases, instead of words like always, only, and for certain. Collectively, wise application of these qualifying terms centers an argument in practical appeals. All right? The 7 strands of a Tumlin argument are knit together. A warrant that supports a claim, backing that supports a warrant, specific support that strengthens reasons, and reasons that support a claim. So I hope that this video segment was helpful, and that you listened and found the radio segment interesting, and that we could learn how to assess another person's actions and or their own reasons for an argument that they felt like they needed to have with a friend. All right, so I encourage you to look at the slides for this week, and then also remember that your paper number 1 is due on the 18th. All right, have a nice day.